Are we
Yeah,
there?
we're there. If I can move the screen out of the way so I can see you. There we are. Okay,
Checking the status on the channel.
sweet. I'm gonna pull up the live chat too so we can watch the chat.
Oh, yeah, good point. Hey, there we are.
Yeah, I can hear us in the background of your audio. So I can see you. There we are. Okay, checking the status on the channel. Sweet.
Oh, yeah. If I'm going to have the video there, I need to mute
pull
it.
up the-
Cool. All right. So here we are. It's happening. All right. Why don't you give some folks maybe a couple of minutes to drop in?
Yeah. I was listening in the background there. That was had the feedback.
I'm going to do a quick story. And
yeah. So we're here, the third one.
this is the third one. Yeah.
While you're doing that, I can just kind of recap what we were going to talk about.
Sure.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. Today is going to be our third installment of Wax Lab, guys. It's been a while since we've been on. Life, we've just been busy. Not your fault, but we're glad you're here. So we're going to talk today a little bit about armatures and kind of the background behind why you would choose a different type of armature for whatever project you might be using it for. And then kind of talk about planning that project out a little bit. And Kerf has some excellent examples, not only from his own work, but from some other makers' work that we can look at and kind of talk about choices that they made and maybe some tips and tricks along the way. So I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, this is an exciting one. This is what first, I think, where I really took a deep dive into sculpting. It was just the kind of the setup for it. That's where like the engineering of things came into being. I think I was thinking about the Craftsman's Space Chicken. I think he had a similar armature, just like a rigid foil kind of base that he built around, or maybe he did it in a different clay and then put the epoxy sculpt on top. Seeing how they did armatures at Kenner with the articulation, and how they used them to as a way to standardize the size of figures, and also replicate the articulation through each step of their process. I'm generally a planner, and so when it comes to an armature, they're really the plan for any particular sculpt. And so yeah, we'll be talking about different kinds of armatures, why you might want to use one versus another. What are the implications of using certain ones as you go down the line through the production process? Yeah, it'll be a good topic to discuss. Yeah, and we do have some pretty good examples of what these different types look like. There are certainly many more out there, and yeah, if anyone is watching this and you have, you want to share an example, say something in chat or in the comments, and we can find, if it's on Instagram, we can pull up the account and take a look at the photos there. Ordinary Toys, good to see you. I can't hear you, John. All right, we got 5 minutes. Five folks on. I wonder if I'm one of them. Still can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just saying we've got Toys Alive and Retro Tinker, Mr. Ordinary in the chat. So appreciate you guys being on.
Second Galaxy.
This week.
Nice.
And bring on the comments as we go. We'll try and answer any questions we can. And I don't know. Ready to go?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay.
All right. All right. So let's go into a slideshow here. All right. So we've got a bit of an outline here to go through, but it's not a set outline. We can jump around if comments come up that you might want to jump ahead or go back. It's not a problem at all. But yeah, talking about armatures, the what, the when, and the how. So I'd say these aren't necessarily official terms for the parts of an armature, but I guess for the purpose of this discussion, we'll try to use the same language so we know what we're talking about. So the base, skeleton, filler, and articulation, those are not all sculpts will need all of these things, but if you're thinking about an armature, you might want to consider some of these aspects. Certainly all of them will have some kind of skeleton. That's going to be it's what's going to support your sculpture depending on its size. It's going to be what you're attaching your clay to, or whatever sculpting medium that might be. In some cases, depending on the softness of your sculpting material, you may want to attach that armature to a base that allows you to hold the base while you're sculpting, so you're not distorting clay. Sometimes that happens with Sculpey, and partly the reason why I shifted to using monster clay myself, just because I was bothered by how much I was able to smudge Super Sculpey. The filler, also, again, depending on your size, you may want to fill out the volume of your sculpt, so that really the kind of you only have maybe a 1/4 inch thick layer or less of clay on top of that. There are some things to consider there that we'll talk about. And then the articulation. If you want to do an articulated figure, the armature is a good time to think about it, because it's a bit of engineering, and sometimes that can be incorporated into the armature. Sometimes it can be added after the fact. Or even added if you're doing wax. You can add it in during the wax phase. But it can be, perhaps depending on your experience level, getting it done at the armature stage means you don't have to fiddle around with modifying your sculpt later. But I think that kind of comes down to what you might be comfortable with.
Yeah, we got a bunch of examples, so sit tight for the pictures, but it's good to kind of get the verbiage out of the way first.
Yeah. So with the bases, I've kind of classified these three types here. The first is the anchored base, and like and we'll show some examples, but like what I used for my bounty buddies, I basically have this wire going through this foil here, and it's attached to the bottom. This allows this kind of very maybe non-standard shape to be anchored to this block, so I can hold the block while I sculpt it in Super Sculpey. It's something you'll kind of like, you'll leave the sculpt on the base until you're ready to mold it. At which point you're unthreading the wire through there. Another way to do it, and for particularly smaller sculpts, you might want to use a cork, and you just stick the wire into the cork. Clamps are maybe a more convenient way to do an anchored sculpt. It requires well, not only is it holding your piece, but it also is probably a more comfortable block to hold, base to hold while you're sculpting. And if for some reason you need to take it off and sculpt with it off the clamp, it's easy to remove. And then stands, those are more they're not it's not attached to it, but it's more used as a way to prop up your sculpt. Yeah, there you go, John's showing it there in the screen.
I have to talk so they can see the stream. Yeah, like I had for my General Kale figure, he would sit on the stand.
Yeah. I think right now it's actually focused on the presentation, but you're showing up in a little side thing. Anyways.
Yeah, it's yeah, we're trading back and forth on the little tiny screen, but close-ups are coming.
I see. Okay,
not to worry, close-ups are coming.
So when to use a base, yeah, anchored you can really use for any size, but depending on the size of the sculpt, you may want a base that you can hold in your hand and rotate more freely. Other larger sculpts may be on like on a potter's wheel or something that you're able to spin it around. Clamps, usually I'd say you don't want to be holding the big block. I think the clamps are more for handheld bases in most cases, and so it's not going to be anything bigger than maybe 5 inches. Otherwise, your sculpt can get quite heavy on the end of the clamp. And then stands, I've used these for larger pieces, but maybe some sculpts are you can work with them in your hands, but you can't lay it down, and it may not stand well on its own. So just some kind of stand attached to a base that allows you to kind of lean the figure into it, or the stand grips it in some way.
And I'll say I in my latest sculpt, I used the lid of a Gatorade bottle there as a stand, and then built the stand on top of that, but it stayed as part of the sculpt. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Even better if the sculpt comes with a stand built into it, right? You don't have to worry about trying to remove it later. So here's some examples of the anchored bases. You can see kind of how this concept, can scale to different sizes. There are different ways to attach, a sculpt or the armature to the base. You could, do like some kind of screw in or something. Lots of options. But again, the size and the shape of that base will affect how well you're able to hold it and rotate it in your hand as you're sculpting. For the clamp base here, I just did a little wire armature, but the key is that the armature has some kind of descending wire that you can clamp between the block. And this is just using, pieces you can get from a hardware store. And then a stand for my giant gator sculpt here. The T-joint here for the hips actually is just resting on top of this post. So the dark post here is screwed into this this washer here, and that's all screwed down to the base. But it allows me to pick up the gator, remove it from the stand. And here on the right, from Thomas Quinn, who's a toy sculptor on Instagram, is showing this piece he did a while back, and you can see how these little gripper arms are coming out to help hold the figure. Really fantastic work there. I'll be showing some other examples of this one. He's using some interesting articulation pieces for the sculpt too. All right, so skeletons. Yeah, there's, I think maybe the more common one is just a wire-based armature, and that's what I'm referring to when I say bendable. You can, once you make it, you can bend it into a different position, and that can be helpful, when you're if you're not quite sure how you want it to look, or as you're adding clay on, you realize maybe we kind of rotate an arm a little bit, or twist the head. Those kinds of changes are easier with a bendable wire structure. Rigid, on the other hand, like the Bounty Buddy ones, there's not much moving this. This is really just kind of to serve as a inner structure, a kind of a static structure. And let's see. Also, depending on the size, it might be beneficial for it to be rigid, so that it's depending on how heavy the clay is on the structure, it could warp over time as you're sculpting, and having some rigidity in there could preserve your work better as you're sculpting. Then you're articulated. That's what we see the toy shops doing. What we just saw in the previous photo by Thomas Gwynn here, this sculpt has articulation built into it. Again, we'll look into that in more detail, but the benefit of having the articulation in that sculpt, it allows you to see how those pieces are working together, how they interact and move relative to one another. So you can make better decisions in your sculpt, make sure you get the full range of motion that you expect. And then castings, that's really any, perhaps it doesn't even have to be a casting. It could just be another figure that you're modifying, but it's a way to start sculpting and provide some structure to your sculpt by starting from an existing figure. Whether you do it in you're applying new clay on top of it, or doing a wax casting of it and modifying that sculpt. It's another way to start, but usually when you start that way, you don't have to think about any internal structure to it, but you're just kind of relying on the cast form.
I will say, I guess I'll interject that there can be combinations of any number of these too. You might have some parts that are rigid, some parts that are bendable. You might have like this third picture over from the left there. There's an articulated armature, but it's also got bendable limbs, right? So
yep.
You might have a casting that you make, and then you can cut that up and then add articulation to it later. Mm-hmm. There's a whole number of like combinations. We're just trying to make it clear, right? Yeah, no, you're right, and it's rigid too between the shoulders and the hips, right. And I think that supports their production process of keeping the orientation of the shoulder and hip joints parallel to one another. From left shoulder to right hip, and the inverse, ensuring that all four of those points are on the same plane, supports their production process. Yeah, so it's a way to avoid undercuts and weird stuff in production, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and here's an example of the wax cast I did for the Goth soldier. Now, fillers, it's I guess there are numerous options and more than I think are just shown here. But the purpose of the filler is to bulk out your sculpt, one to lower its overall weight. Instead of using just straight clay all the way through there, it can be faster to build that that volume up. And here are some of the pros and cons for these, but some like the epoxy sculpt, you get the advantage of it being having some strength to it when it's cured, but you're also spending more money on the epoxy sculpt, and it takes more time to cure. So you have to plan things out a little more there. Tinfoil, I think, is the most common that I've seen, but something to think about in the production process when using tinfoil is if you haven't packed it tight enough, and you're pressurizing your silicone molds when they're curing. If your sculpt is in there and it has an air pocket inside the tinfoil, that the air volume in there is going to get collapsed, and that could distort your sculpt. So something to consider when using foil. Now,
unless you use it as an intermediate step and you're not pressurizing it, where you might make a mold unpressurized, and cast wax into it, and then you work on your wax afterwards, then you wouldn't have to worry about that. So
exactly. And but to that point, the molds I made for the Goth figures, I didn't bother pressurizing those because I was pretty confident that the silicone along the surface was going to come out smooth and not have any bubbles. But there's not enough time to pressurize wax either. So I guess for those who are going to receive those molds in the mail, please don't try to pressure cast in those with resin, because you're going to come out really dimply or pimply, I guess. Sculpey, I think, Johnny, you and I have found that the Sculpey can be a little fragile at times. But if it's like a solid mass, and I think it's not too thin, you can do pretty well with it.
I was gonna say, it depends on the scale. If you're doing something like your Bounty Buddies, that's perfect. Like Sculpey would be great. If you're doing something that's a little bit more like that 3 3/4 scale, or even smaller, like it just gets real brittle when it's thin like that.
And then salt dough, that's a new one, and you've seen an artist, I believe he's a French artist, has I'll show them here. He did the Batman 1964 figure. Did a limited edition of those, really beautiful sculpt. But he also shows his process, and so this is a photo of his bulked out, filled out armature that he would eventually put clay on. But the white here is all this salt dough that he just puts on and bakes, and thought it was a pretty clever use of some common kitchen ingredients. But in this case, the figure, I think it may be like 9 inches tall or something like that. It's a pretty sizable one. So, to fill that in with foil might not be so bad. But using clay, it's going to make your figure, your sculpt, really heavy.
Salt dough is a new one to me.
Yeah,
but it makes sense. It's genius. So you can I'm pretty sure too. You can see where he's locking in the armature to those articulation pins and joints using that. So it's kind of similar like how I would use epoxy sculpt to kind of, you can, first layer is just solidifying your armature.
Yeah.
When that cures, then it's, immovable. It's strong then. So
Yeah,
looks like the same kind of deal there.
yeah. We'll look at more photos of this a little later.
Yeah.
And here's my very first armature of a Ninja Turtle sculpt that I did, and yeah,
Nice.
that one took a bit of reworking to get the proportions right. Now, I guess I should also say this: the armature is also the point where you really want to give a lot of attention to the proportions in your sculpt. I think we'll see another some examples later, but to take a drawing of your figure and scale it to the size that you want it to be when it's final can be a great way to plan your armature. You can lay it down, you can lay the wire down over your drawing. You can cut the lengths of wire to match the design in your drawing. You can also use it to plan out where you want your articulation to be. All that kind of pre-planning can make your armature work better for you down the road, because any inconsistency or any mistake you may have made in the armature will be an issue for you as you're sculpting, and you'll end up kind of working against it through that process.
I'll say too, it's good to plan that out, because you may have other elements that you tack on as far as details, and so planning that out ahead of time makes you you might adjust how much filler you put in certain areas, because you might be putting something else on later.
Yeah,
that makes sense. So it's good to kind of write it out and draw it all out. That's what I do, is draw it all out in my sketchbook and figure out all those issues as best you can beforehand, and then at some point you have to just take the leap.
Be sure to check out Nicholas Brousseau here. He's does some really incredible work.
And
shares
packaging
his
design
process. I know it's
his
top
packaging
notch.
design is insane. Yeah.
Great. So anatomy of articulation. So we've talked about your skeleton, and but for those who are interested in articulating your figure, there are some concepts to understand and kind of know, like what are some of the common working parts, and you can, I think what we'll see is you can really create articulation from even everyday household materials, and still get the same effect. But you're going to have your dowel that serves as the pivot for for different kinds of joints. Your disc will create the discs on both sides of the parts that are being articulated. Is going to create a flat interface, which means when you get to the production side of things, you can be confident that the resin castings you make are going to have that same flat surface. You don't have to worry about sanding those things down later. It's just a great way to make sure that also in rotation, having any kind of warped interface can lead to wearing down of the two surfaces, or uneven rotation, or maybe tight on one side. By having those flat surfaces when using those that are created from those discs, it's really going to make for a much better articulated interface. Ball and socket, I think there's it's going to give you a much broader range of movement. But I think another point we'll talk about is that when sculpting, having articulation that you can easily detach is going to be an important step to sculpting in the round on each piece. It's likely you're not going to keep all those parts on the sculpt the entire time, but you're going to take off the arm, you're going to take off the head, take off the leg kind of thing, and sculpt on those parts, put them back on, and see how they rotate. All that detaching and reattaching can put stress on your sculpt, and so using dowels, since they're just straight cylinders, those can be pulled on and off. But with balls and sockets, you're going to have to use a little bit more pressure to get that kind of snap back in there. So think about the softness of your sculpting medium as a because if you're pulling on a piece or pushing a piece on, you don't want to mess up your sculpt as you're doing that. And then the anchors, it's not always necessary, but having some kind of anchor, some way to fix a disc to something that some armature wire can attach to, means that you can ensure that the pin or the disc stays in the right place. But you can also kind of press those into your clay or glue them on, depending on what medium you're using, and that's another way to attach it. But yeah, these discs, I guess when you're thinking about them at the armature level, and not kind of like during the sculpting phase, you'll want to find some way to fix either longer rods or wire to those discs.
And I guess I'll add too that the articulation that you use while you're sculpting doesn't have to be the same one that you're using in production. So you can use, a lot of times the pins are good as a placeholder to just pull it off, work on the sculpt, and put it back together. And then when you're ready, you can mold and cast it into a different type of articulation, whatever you're thinking you want to use.
Yeah, you could widen the holes, for the diameter of a magnet, or you could replace the dowels with T pegs or like the mushroom pegs, and set those into to the torso.
Yeah, or like a Glios joint or whatever.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
Imagination. Use your imagination.
Yeah. So here are some different types of articulation. Your pivot is your basic. The rotation is on a singular plane, compared to a ball joint that can go in many more directions. But it's typically the pivot is two interfacing sides with a dowel through it. You might see those on heads and waists, wrists, as opposed to the hinge, which you may see more in elbows and knee joints. The design of the hinge is 3 discs, in which the middle one is separate from the 2 sides, and oftentimes those hinge joints are shown in the final product. So the thickness of those discs can affect the aesthetic of the design. When you think about how a knee bends and exposes the hinge there, you don't want 3 thin little discs showing when the knee bends. You may want to have a thicker middle one, versus thinner ones on the side, or vice versa. But effectively, the discs in the hinge are a part of the sculpt, are a part of the design. Your T crotch.
Let me back up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, to the hinge, but I'll just reiterate again that's the same with like the pivot joints. If there's things that are not parallel, that can cause problems later on, like especially if you're using resin, it can make it fragile and it could break if it's too much pressure in one point or the other.
Yeah.
So building those things to be precise and in parallel with each other is well, it's helpful, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. The T crotch, I think, is a is kind of is a pivot joint and a hinge joint in some regards, from different perspectives. But it's your common action figure hip joint, where the crotch is in the middle, the legs come in on the sides, and they can be it can be designed in a way in which you have a singular dowel that goes all the way through the through the left leg, the crotch, and then into the right leg. The legs can articulate independently on that dowel, but sort of the crotch acts as like the hinge between the legs, so to speak. Ball joints, you're typically going to see those in necks and shoulders and hips. And I think maybe with some of the more advanced action figures these days, you might see them in other places as well, like wrists. And then there are your armature kits. And I know I'm not the only one who makes them, but the benefit of them is that if you can use them consistently in a series of action figures, that you can be sure that all those figures are going to be following certain proportions. It kind of takes a lot of the mathematics of ensuring your proportions are right. It's kind of answered a lot of those questions for you, and then you can just get to sculpting when you get the kit, whether that's the 5 points of articulation kits. I modeled mine after the way they did it at Kenner, and by using that rigid torso, it's following that same pattern of ensuring that all those points of articulation are on the same plane, again, which facilitates their production process. And then the Just Joints kit was my kind of answer to the to how to make the pivot joints easier to do. Instead of going out and finding discs and dowels to use and finding ways to anchor those into your sculpt, the joints kit is really the discs and a sleeve and a dowel for each joint, that allows you to kind of easily integrate those into a wire armature, or even just press them into your clay and get that articulation, kind of that precision articulation right away. For more on these different types of articulation, we highly recommend Pop Sculpture. It goes into a lot of detail about these different types, and with some great examples. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah, I second that. The craftsman sent us that as a recommendation, and I got it, and I was just blown away. It's it's very, very well done.
Yeah,
highly recommend reading that book.
So here are some examples of the armature kits. Are really just all pivot joints. Each one of these is a separate dowel with these nylon discs in these places. For the hips too, these are separate separate pins there. Compare this to Nicholas's Batman sculpt here. He's got pivot joints in the arms and the head. He's got hinges in the elbows and knees. We see the T crotch here. And it looks like there may be separate pins there. I can't quite tell if it's all the way designed to be all the way through or not, but yeah, these are Yeah, this is a great example of how these two how these different joints can work together. You can see here on the hinge, um, the center disc. He actually brought the kind of kneecap design over the top of that disc to obscure um, the visibility of those hinge discs.
Yeah, I'll say too, I believe it was Stan Winston's school. They have a YouTube channel, and there's a free little snippet video that talks about toy articulation, and that's another good reference. They
Cool.
talk about this same stuff.
Yeah, I just have some other examples here. I mean, we saw these earlier. This is a clamp using a flexible wire armature. Here, I started to plan this out by first doing the drawing to scale and then cutting the wire to fit. When it comes to applying certain mediums to wire, it can be helpful to use an adhesive. And so in this case with Super Sculpey, I used the Sculpey adhesive, applied that to the wire before putting the Sculpey on. Also in this case, I baked this for maybe half the time to make the clay more sturdy for the next layer of clay.
I will say too, this is a really small one, so obviously it wasn't necessary, but like on the arms there, if it was a larger armature, you may wrap the wire there with a smaller wire. It gives some tooth for the clay to stick to, so it doesn't just slide off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's another technique. Yeah.
Yeah, here's how I planned out the very first armature kit that I used for the number 2 figure. By doing these to scale, I could get all the dimensions from the paper and then cut my wood block to fit.
What's that drawing to the next to the right of number 2 there? Looks like a different guy.
Oh, this might have been another character that I was planning to
do. That'd be cool if we got back to that one.
Well, I'm going to move on to the fringe.
Yeah, there you go.
Similar inspired suit designs, though. Looking forward to it. And here, for the kit, you can just and again, depending on the sculpting medium, some clays may be a little more tacky than others. I find the monster clay adhered pretty well, and once it's cool enough, it stays pretty rigid. But in this case, I'm just building the clay around all of the articulation fixtures. That's another way that I referred to the discs and pins. But you can see how just you can take the parts off, sculpt them around, put them back on, see how they articulate. That's also an important aspect to have. An important feature to have, especially when doing the legs, because as the leg rotates, the shape of the top of the leg, the back of the leg, all plays into kind of how it interfaces with the torso.
Yeah, and then maybe it's getting a little too deep in the weeds, but you can use that to your advantage. Some of those vintage figures have the stops where the leg can't go too far backwards, so the leg doesn't look like it's out of place.
Yeah.
But it only goes forward. You can put things in place in your sculpt to make that to manipulate that movement of the joint.
Yeah. Also with these, well, depending on what your next step is after your clay sculpt, if you're going to make a mold of it and just cast resin as your production piece, you may want to think about articulation in your armature. That's going to be your production armature, your production articulation. In the case of my number 2 figure, I created molds here on the left, the plaster mold, so I could do a wax casting. And to bring that articulation, those same articulation points into the wax cast, I can just reinsert those articulation fixtures, your discs and your dowels into the mold, cast around it so that I have the same holes. The holes are in the same place as they were in the original. And then again, when I make the silicone mold for the resin casting, I put the dowels back in, cast around it, and take the dowels out. And now I know that the articulation points are always in the same position. And then after doing that fixed torso kit, I wanted to make something a little more flexible, or with a wider range of scaling options. And so I came up with the with my 2.0 5-point articulation kit, and yeah, so it's operating on a similar concept as the original, but you can cut down the sides of the tubes here to fit to work with the scale that you want. And also makes the where here in this kit I'm using 1/8 inch diameter dowels. In this one I'm using 3/16 diameter for the dowels. Let's see if I have another shot here. And that's really in the interest of treating these as production ready articulation joints. By having a thicker diameter there, I think it's going to make for a stronger resin casting than an 1/8 inch dowel. So that was another feature improvement there.
I'll say too, you get the drawings there where you can kind of use to scale the armature, like the legs or the arms or the torso to the right size. Like that's super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's not a kit, it can be helpful to draw that out to scale. Yep. And you see he's got the head proportions there. So that's an artist trick, and he's got, I think, another slide of this, but using a certain number of heads to give the proportions to the body. So depending on whether it's a regular sized human or it's some sort of like superhuman X-Men type of guy, then you might want to adjust those proportions. But draw that out first, have it all planned out, and then you can move your armature around to get it to the right proportions. Then you don't have to worry about it, and you just throw clay on and start sculpting.
And yeah, here's an example of the just joints where basically you get the post and the dowel and the disc in one piece, and then the interfacing part is a disc with a sleeve on it. That sleeve is there to make it easier to insert into clay or to attach a wire armature to it. Here in the mock-up, you can see, in this Muckman style figure, where the placement of those joints would be, and here's how I've wrapped wire around the sleeve, added wire to the tab on the opposite side of the joint, or you can just stick it straight into a lump of clay or whatever filler you're using.
Had some questions in the chat about when those articulation kits are available.
Sorry, I don't have a time right now. It's a production hurdle because of the small volume. They take a while to cure, and so I don't want to just do one kit at a time. I want to do like 10 kits at a time. So I need to work with a partner that has a laser cutter to help me with that. So I think those will come certainly not before I finish the goth figures. I'm kind of on a roll with those, but By Decon 2023 in December, I will have some, if not sooner. Sorry
Coming
for
soon. Coming soon.
Yeah, so here's just a example of when I've added articulation after making the armature. In this case, I was doing a giant in the scale of in 1/18 scale for Cronin Builders world of action figures. And actually here I'm using a stand to hold this. It's not anchored, but you can see the stand in the background. But here I started with this flexible skeleton. But then I wanted to make copies of it so I could, practice different sculpts. And so I took that green clay sculpt, made a alginate mold from it, cast it in monster clay. And so in the monster clay here, it's just solid monster clay, using that as my armature, as my casted armature. But later, I wanted to add the articulation to it. So here you like cut off the part, you drill some holes to put your dowels in. Now, cutting a part off to add articulation, I don't think it's really a good idea to try to do that if you have a wire armature inside. That wire armature is just going to get in the way. So if you have a wax casting that you want to add it to, I think that's the approach to go. Or in this case, it's a solid clay cast. That's the kind of situation you would want to do this in. And then here I heat up the clay and the metal washer in this case, so it would kind of press in and embed into the clay more easily, using a little alcohol torch here, and you can see the final result with the interface here. Now, this disc doesn't cover the complete face of this joint. But it serves as a guide that I can use to plane the rest of the clay around it.
That's a pretty cool picture you have there of shooting the flame out the side of the.
Yeah,
that's hard
a
to
handy
capture.
little torch there.
So those plastic torches, you can squeeze the bottle and it'll shoot the flame out to the side, and that's a pretty handy tool.
Yeah, I think I had my wife help me take that shot.
Nice.
All right. Yeah, so here are some of the other examples. This again from Thomas Gwynn. You can see that he has dowels even down in the foot. There's a hinge joint down there. These and behind the knees, you can see the hinge joint there. And really that knee is completely obscured by the design of the front of those pants. You can't even see the hinge there except for the back. And I think he has other hinges in the elbows, and maybe some pivots in the head and the wrist. Now, this looks like a ball back here, but I think John, you have an example of some articulation pieces where it's a hinge, but the outer discs of the hinge are actually kind of domes, right?
Yeah, where it can kind of roll around almost like a pivot.
It doesn't. It just kind of fills it out, right? It doesn't act like a ball joint. It's a hinge with kind of a ball shape, right?
Yes. I could show it in a minute when we're not sharing screens, but yeah, there's different types.
And here's the other one from Nicholas. You can see his start to his armature here. It looks like he's just cutting out either plastic or possibly cardboard for his discs. I think he's using maybe styrene rods or maybe even cut pens for the dowels. Some metal hardware. And then he's starting to bulk it out as well with the foil. Now here it looks like he has 2 hinges, but it's actually the inner part of the hinge for the upper arm, and then the outer part of the hinge for the lower arm. Large sculptures. When I did this gator, it was this really thick gauge aluminum wire, probably like a 1/4 inch thick, pretty hard to bend too. And but then, as John was saying before, you can wrap that wire with thinner wire to kind of add more grip to it for your clay. Even supported some of the areas of it with some epoxy sculpt to keep the wires in place. They were a little loose. I couldn't get them too tight with just the wire. You can use different gauge wire for, the tentacles were really thick, but they were also needed to hold up, the weight of the tentacle. But then I used thinner wire for the hands, and then I started bulking on the clay. And then for things like accessories, maybe you just need something straight, for a weapon. You could use a toothpick. You could use Legos. Really anything that takes that makes the shape that you want to sculpt around, and will give your sculpt some strength as you're sculpting on it. But yeah, that's the end of the presentation here.
Yeah, some great photos. So if there's any questions or anything, like throw them in the chat. We'll try and answer anything that comes up. But I think it's a pretty good baseline to like what is an armature and how to use it. Why would you use certain types over other types?
Yep.
And I will say too, it's there's no wrong answer. There's a lot of ways to tackle that one, and maybe it's what you've been exposed to, maybe it's what you're comfortable with, or maybe you're just trying something new. But there's a whole lot of different ways to tackle that.
Yep.
That problem. Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. There we go.
Just a lot of compliments.
Cool. Hey, Tom. All right. Well, what if we get to some wax sculpting?
Let's.
I'll switch to my phone here.
So I think I'm gonna try and share my screen real quick. See if that works. Oh, it looks really orange to me. It's orange to you guys, but I'm trying a new tool here. Let's see if this is working. But similar to the presentation there, Kerf has been nice enough to send me a couple of examples. So this is his original kit. Let's see that. And the 2.0. And then we got a few examples here of clay on top of the original style kit. Or I don't know, is this one the original style? I'm assuming. Yeah, it's the smaller pins. So this is in wax. It's another one that Kerf sent to me. So I just wanted to mention too, like a technique here. He's put a pin in the hand in order to just keep the spacing there, and that way, as you create an accessory to go with it. Let's see if I can try this little drawing thing. Yeah, look at that. As you create an accessory, you can use the pin as the handle for the accessory, and then you'll know that it's going to fit perfectly in the hand. Right. So another kind of use for that. And then, like I said, there's a couple different armatures here to show. This is just a simple wire armature. If you can see in the tail, you can kind of still see. And I actually used cardboard for the body of this lion. So I took a photo as based on the Masters of the Universe like Cringer character. So I took a photo of that, shrunk it down to the size I wanted, and then just cut out a cardboard armature of the body. I super glued the cardboard and that made it stiff. And then I was able to wrap wire around it and use that for the legs and the tail. And then just threw clay on top. This is monster clay. So it's not completed yet, but it's a good place to start, where you can take that and mold it and cast it in wax and then put details in. And then I alluded to this one also earlier, but this is the Necron 99 sculpt. This is his horse that he rides, I guess, or creature he rides. But that is just a lid for a Gatorade bottle, and I ran wires through, drilled holes and put wires through it, and then I filled that with epoxy sculpt, and that made it very rigid. And so then used the wires to build up the forms, and built out the bulk here with a little bit of tinfoil, as was mentioned before, and then sculpted on top of that. So this is all epoxy sculpt and a little bit of the super sculpting on top of that too. Just trying to get some details. So
the paint job on that thing is great, man.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. It's good enough to where it makes me nervous to mold it now. I don't want to ruin it. But this was another one I was working on too. This is actually a wax casting, so that it isn't an armature inside. But when I originally did this, this is another wire armature that I used to make sure I got the right proportions and everything for this. So this is based on another Instagram artist's 2D rendering, and I was trying to bring it to the third dimension here. And then I also built a base for it. This is a found object here. It had a cool shape, and then I cut a piece of MDF to fit in the middle or inside there to fill in some of these holes. But I think that'll be a cool one when we can cast that one up as well. But armatures and everything. Another quick down and dirty clamp type armature base. This is just two pieces of 2x4 screwed together, and then I have the wire clamped in between with the screws are holding it together. So use that a few times.
Yeah, one thing I found about let's see, my audio is coming through the phone if I sound different. The size of the clamp relative to the size of your sculpt. If the base is too wide, it can be hard to get a tool in certain directions.
True.
And so the smaller base, that gives you more working angles rather than the really broad ones. If you're using and I guess even better if you have a round clamp or like a cork that's round, then you're increasing more the angles of approach.
Yeah. A couple more examples and then I'll get off the share screen. But this is the cast I made of a Migo figure. So this is all solid resin. But this can be a starting point for another sculpt. So it's already got the articulation areas, like the T crotch is already built in here, and the arms. So it would be just a matter of cutting those off and adjusting your sculpt from there. But that's an example, like Kerf was saying, of something that might be a casting that you start as a base for your sculpt. This could be something like that as well. So it's in the works. And then I have a couple of things that came from Dave Evans, Dream Castle Studios on Instagram. If you guys don't follow him, you should. He's a much more experienced sculptor than I am, but these are some different types of articulation. So this has got a hinge point, and it's also got the ball joint, and there's the what you call it, Kerf? The anchor. Right. So you would anchor this into an arm, say, or something like that, and maybe this would go into the shoulder, and then it can spin around on this little pin, but it also has the hinge joint. And let's see if I can show you this guy.
It's like a G.I. Joe shoulder.
Similar, yeah. So there's the hinge joint, right? And then it's also rotating around a pin, if that makes sense.
What action figure is that?
This is a one-off I got from him. It's that's a pretty cool piece, but I don't think this was actually in production.
Oh,
yeah. Don't mean to show off, but it has the articulation there. And then he has a couple other pieces. I don't know if you guys can see that, but they basically just got little pins coming off of that that then you can bury into your clay or wax or whatever you're using.
Cool.
So yeah. So yeah, there you go. A couple of those different things. I'll come off sharing the screen here, maybe.
Well, why don't you keep it there, and I'll switch to my video, to my work desk, and just get to sculpting.
I'll just change my camera. That way you're not tiny. Let's see if that works. Yeah.
Can you shift it? Can you change the view so that it hides on your end, hide non-video participants? And that'll get these other ones out of the way.
Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, it's already got it off. Oh, I see what you're saying. Hold on.
You can hide self view, but also turn off hide non-video participants. I think if you make your screen wide enough, maybe they'll get side by side. Or maybe I'll change the orientation of my camera. Can you change the orientation of your camera so it's horizontal?
Maybe. I'm still searching for your other thing.
Maybe in the top right where it says view.
Yeah. Oh, I gotcha. So I've just got show non-video participants, so I think it's already set.
Oh, okay. All right, then I was able to set it on my side.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure I can change the.
You might have to like force it to rotate in a different orientation and then turn it back down.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you tell us what you're working on, and I'll figure this out in the background here.
Sure. Yeah. So, I think what I'm going to work on is the Vader skull. Well, no, that may be a little too tight for the camera. So I think I want to modify the kind of face covering. It's intended to be like a, I guess not like a hood, but more of a big. I guess I wish I knew the name of the part of the jacket or something. It just kind of a big kind of cuff that comes up around the head, almost like a giant turtleneck. But right now it's not looking the way I hoped. So here he's got the kind of slit eye mask, and I think it needs to be a little wider. So it's looking pretty good on the camera, but I think I need to rework the. I don't know. I think it's feeling a little thick. Like when I look at the profile there, maybe that's not. Or maybe it's looking too shallow. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, I can't figure out the camera. We'll roll with it.
Yeah, you're good.
What to work on? What should I work on? I was gonna throw some clay on this guy. It's not necessarily wax casting though, or wax.
Go for it.
Sculpting.
Go for it.
Okay. I do have wax on it. I guess that's a story to tell.
Yeah, why do you have wax on it?
So I made the armature, and I thought I'd build it out. It is fairly small and skinny, but I soon realized it's going to take way too long to bulk it out as much as I want to with the wax, and so I'm going to switch gears and we'll do some clay and mold and cast it type of thing.
Sounds like you could use wax sticks.
I was just gonna say, yeah, Kerf there's got the wax sticks, which pretty handy little tip we got from who did we get that from?
Steven.
Yeah, and basically you take I don't have anything to show, but you take like a metal trough, so you can use those little brass
I'll show mine
at the hobby shop. You got them? Okay, so yeah, he's made a mold.
I actually took polystyrene here, different shapes, and then just made a mold of that. Now what I found is the shape doesn't really make a difference, because the way I'm using them is basically melting the stick on top of the tool, like this, like that, and so the shape has really no bearing on the end result.
Yeah, and that's something Stephen was saying. Like, it's really easy to just build up wax quickly with that that technique, and it makes sense. It's like having a welding rod, right? And you're like welding, and you're using the welding rod to add material, or if you're soldering, similar kind of concept. So I need to make some of those, but haven't done that yet. So back to the clay, the old standby. So tell me a little bit, Kerf, about your concept of going to like step by step, keeping all of these at the same stage as you go.
The goth guys.
Yeah, the goth figures.
Before I answer that, Robert in the comments is asking, he notices that I'm using the jeweler's wax sheets here, and I'm using them for straps, belts, kind of things on the figures.
That's another tip we picked up from that pop culture book.
Yeah.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah. Would I get the stuff again? Uh, I don't think I'll run out. Is maybe the better way to phrase the answer. The variety pack that I got from Rio Grande, I think there's maybe 12 sheets of each thickness here, and they're like 3 by 6 inches. There's gonna be plenty as long as I keep it clean. I don't think I'm gonna run out for how little I'm actually using it. But it's a handy thing to have around. So if I run out and I'm still doing this, yeah, I would definitely get more. I might experiment with a different kind of wax if they have it something that's a little firmer. This I think tends to get a little sticky if I from the warmth of my fingers on it. So I would either figure out a way to like keep it more chilled as I'm working with it, except for when I need to bend it, kind of thing. But and probably certainly put it on last. In the case here with Chewy, this was really intended to be a mock-up of what I wanted, but I think I'll wait until I get the other areas sculpted, and then put the sheet on before I mold.
Yeah, I will say maybe we're dipping ahead into future episodes, but that's part of the reason all that kind of stuff is why why I got really excited about trying to figure out wax recipes, and Kerf helped me out a bunch with finding a bunch of stuff from people who've done it in the past. But that sort of like knowing how to craft your own wax recipe could be super handy when you're trying to replicate something like that. Like, I like this, but it's just too sticky. How do I make it less sticky? Well, we're trying to figure that one out. I'll tell you right now, I don't know the exact answer. We have to try a few things, but that's the adventure. That's the fun part of it.
Now here I'm actually tipping the figure upside down as I melt the wax. So I want the wax to kind of drip downwards and create a kind of an upper ridge here. You can see I'm adjusting the profile so that it's almost looks like it's coming out over his nose a little bit.
So yeah, back to my original question.
Oh yes. So that question was, why am I working on so many figures at the same time?
Well, and the stages.
and well, yes, and working at them all at the same stage.
Yeah.
It's an experiment and one that I'm really enjoying. What I'm finding is there's a certain degree of, a certain degree, the way I think about a sculpt changes as I go from rough to refined, and I think working well, I can go through all those stages of a sculpt on one figure and then restart for the next figure, and that can take some adjusting in that restart. Certainly, there's more time between each phase, but I found that there's some efficiency to be had by working at the same level across multiple figures. I'm thinking at the same level of like, all right, let's rough this part out. All right, I've roughed it out. I can move on to the next one. There's also similar techniques. If I'm using a spoon tip, on the end of my wax tool to add a lot of wax, or I'm using the wax sticks, I can just keep that tip on, move to the next figure, bulk out those shapes and forms before I move on to the next one. And then when everything's bulked out, now I can get out a different set of tools and and go to the next layer of refinement. And it also keeps things interesting too. I won't get bored with just one figure, which I think is certainly is a real thing. To work on something for so long, you get a little bored with it, and you start thinking about other things, and that's when new projects start. All right.
Tell me about it. I have a pile of new projects right here that haven't been finished.
Yeah. Now think if you satisfied your need to work on the things that interest you, but now you're working on multiple things at the same time and at the same level, or they're at the same stage of that idea. That gets a little more exciting, because now you have the big ideas, you're sketching them out, and now you can see each one develop at the same rate, and possibly my theory is I'll get these done faster because of this process. I'll get more figures done in less time than if I had done each one individually. So this is kind of a speed experiment too. But I don't think I'm going to go back and and compare it to doing 9 figures at the in the original in a more linear fashion.
So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but he's always experimenting. He always gets some new technique or something different that you're trying, right?
I don't like wasting time. So if I can do small experiments that take the anxiety out of making a big step, maybe that's the other reason for experimentation is it lowers the stakes. You kind of expect failure when experimenting, and instead of experiencing a failure on a significant project, if you can test it, sketch it out somewhere, and your chances increase. Your chances of success increase when you get to your main project, because you've already done it. And in a way, that's maybe the impetus behind doing these goth figures, is the chance for me to practice a lot of different costume designs, techniques for bulking things out before I get into the fringe figures, because I'm nervous about those. I want those to be
perfect.
I want those to go well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, so the lower stakes for these goth figures, where I'm just manipulating the costume, because the fringe figures are blanks. It's here I'm using this blank as an armature for, I'm going to add costume details to it essentially. And at the moment, I'm actually on the fence about whether I want to do the TPEG. I think I could just save myself a lot of headache and time. Might save that for
Let's open up to the crowd. You guys watching? Like, I'm curious, because a lot of the, I guess, resin collectors seem to just leave things in the package and put it on a shelf, and it doesn't really matter whether it's articulated or not. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments here. Weigh in on this crazy debate, because I don't know if there's a right answer, but a lot of folks have been talking about it.
The debate being whether to use my own TPEG articulation,
right,
or just go with a post with a regular pivot,
or no articulation at all. Is it needed at all? Or maybe the better question is it still a toy if there's no articulation?
Yeah. So here, this was my articulation test. One, because if I'm going to do articulation, I want it to be, I want it to have some friction to it. It's going to stay still when you move the parts. And so I made this little tester here where I used, I made molds of metal dowels. And I think the end result was a highly precise, consistent diameter, consistent, perfect circle circumference for both the sleeve and the post here. And so with a little bit of super glue on the as like a ridge, it's got some nice tightness to it. So I might just stick with that. It makes it easier to swap the parts out. You can, you change the pants on one, move them to another figure.
So you're saying that's just part of your sculpting process articulation, or is that going to be a production articulation?
No, the figures are going to be, the sculpt is going to be articulated, but I think I'll change the dowel that I use in the final. I'll kind of I'll remove the polystyrene one in this case, or the polystyrene one, and replace it with a metal dowel before I make the mold.
But it would still be like a pin articulation.
Yeah.
Production. Yeah.
No, I guess I would make it so the post was sticking out of the arm. Yeah. If is that what you meant?
Yeah. Post where it spins on a pivot joint, right?
Yeah.
In the production. Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll be able to remove it, so it's not going to be locked in with a T-peg.
Yeah. That's like the Plastic Geek on Instagram. You guys aren't following him, follow him. He does that type of articulation in his production figures, and I think it's pretty cool. It works out really nicely. So I'll say, after like going through that whole bit and talking about draw it out and plan out all your stuff and all that jazz, I didn't do any of that with this guy. This is just totally off the cuff.
Walk the walk, man. Walk the talk.
Right. So those are the ones that are sitting here unfinished, are the ones that I planned out meticulously. Experiment. It's an experiment. See if I can actually do something.
All right, let's start to look a little better. I think it was maybe a little too thick around the neck. The hat, the flap of the hat needed to oh, sorry. Yeah, doing the research into costume inspiration. I was looking at a lot of military, Victorian 1800s military uniforms, and thinking about how they could play into these designs. A lot of fun doing the drawings too.
Nothing says goth like 18th century Victorian military costumes. So I was going to ask you, your video feed died out on the last live you were doing, but as far as you were using the wax sheets for like a trench coat on that Chewbacca guy.
Yeah.
How did that work out, and what are we were talking, I was typing in the text and whatever, but as far as like backing up a wavy shape, let's have that conversation.
Yeah. So pop sculpture showed these great examples of capes being done in the wax sheets. But I think the important detail there was the cape was separate from the figure. It was cast separately and would be glued on. And so they didn't have to worry about like a pocket of air getting behind, getting between the cape and the sculpt. In this case, I'm casting these things all as one piece. And so I need to think about the shape. When I put this on here, any air pockets that are between this wax sheet and the figure are going to compress as I make the mold for it. I'm not going to go out and buy a vacuum pump to degas my silicone before doing these. So I need to think about how I want to, when I put some ripples into this, that I need to fill the inside of those ripples with something so that I don't trap some kind of air in there or get silicone up in them. So it's I'm not quite sure yet how I want to do it. It could be that I just end up using the wax sheets for the straps, for the kind of like things I can just lay on the sculpt. But I might end up just sculpting this as a in wax. I'll just get the wax sticks and just bulk it up there.
That's what I was trying to say in the comments. It's hard to describe that. But yeah, but I was curious though, because it did come to mind, like, dripping hot wax onto a thin wax sheet, would that distort it at all, I wonder?
Yeah, well, let's try.
Potentially.
It certainly has a much lower melting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets a little sticky too. I don't like it as a sculpting wax. It's definitely a detailing material.
But you were also using that as like a base for the feet and things like that, right? How did that work out?
I think it's going to work well. I have it on the base of Leia's feet here.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, I was trying to level the feet out. It's weird. The action figure, the production figure, the feet are totally different shapes. One's like thinner, also it's thinner widthwise, but also the thickness from the top of the foot to the bottom of the foot is thinner on one foot than the other. Yeah, I was not impressed, Kenner.
Hey, it's unique, man. It's not cookie cutter.
Oh yeah, I've got the rare thin foot Leia.
Thin foot variant.
Thin foot variant.
I do though. I do kind of admire that about those Kenner sculpts. Like if you look at the G.I. Joe stuff later on, they would just sculpt one leg and then replicate it left and right, and it'd be the exact same on both, which makes sense. Like production wise, it's quicker and cheaper and easier.
For which line?
And the G.I. Joe Real American Hero.
Like the lower leg, they wouldn't do the upper leg that way, would they?
Some of them,
wow.
I think they use as a. You might have to use as a template type of thing because the armature is different on left and right side,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm talking about the lower leg, but it's it makes sense, it's cheaper and easier that way. But I also kind of respect the Kenner guys from just like. Or I was gonna say, yeah, the armature too is the same. G.I. Joe Real American Hero has the same armature, basically, either straight arm or swivel arm, but they're the exact same throughout the whole line. Whereas the Kenner ones have unique little works, right? So like they're
Mhm.
all, some of them might be similar, but a lot of them have this unique, like it's one's taller, one's shorter, one's wider, individual kind of sculpts, and I respect that. Is, you know, when you start looking at the art forms of it, not to
Yeah.
get all weird and nerdy about it, but I think I respect them as an art form. I think they're interesting sculpts, and start looking at it that way. It's each one's got its own little unique thing, which is pretty neat.
Knowing that the Hothleia was sculpted in acetate, I wonder if it was a case of he took too much away from the foot and couldn't add it back.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I can see the difference between them here. This foot's smaller,
Oh yeah,
thinner too. It's almost like it doesn't have the sole of the foot on the left side.
I wonder too, being at the base, it's the base of the foot. Like maybe that's something that happened after the sculpt was turned over to the production folks.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
Let's see. Are the wires you guys use for the armatures the same type of wire used in bendy toys? No, not necessarily,
No.
right?
Yeah, I haven't figured out what gauge or I know actually I did open one. I guess I don't know what metal it is, but I have a feeling it's like a steel wire. It was certainly not easy to bend. Well, I guess I wish I had some way to rate the amount of force it took to bend it, but
Of course you do.
it was sturdier. It was sturdier than aluminum wire. Let me see if I can find it. I actually cut open a Star Wars Bendham.
Yeah, sacrilege.
For science. No, I'm not going to find it. But
He did. I
it's
saw it. He killed it. I was a witness.
it's not only the strength of the wire, but also the flexibility and I guess the tension. I'm not sure what the right physics term is for it. But the rubber's ability to bounce back if the then the tension that the wire can hold, it's not going to hold your bended shape. So you have to get strong. You have to get wire that's stronger than your rubber. I've done one test of that with Smooth-On's PMC 440, I think it was. It's their polyurethane rubber, and it's really bouncy, which I think is a layman's way of saying the rubber was really strong. So I think finding something that's closer, that's maybe not as strong as that. I'm not quite sure what it's more equivalent to, but yeah, and then using that with stronger wire would get that bendy action figure feel. But there's also to cast a figure with that wire armature inside also is a little bit of a engineering trick.
Mm-hmm.
That I've also done an experiment for that, and I don't have any of those materials around me right now.
Yeah, you got to build a jig in order to suspend the wire in the middle of the to be cast part. Right.
Well, it's not so much a jig, but rather what I tested was basically putting little props in the mold that suspended the wire, and also not only suspended it but also gripped it enough so that it wouldn't shift when you filled the mold. And then when you take the piece out, you remove the props from the casting, and that's why you see those little dots, the little holes in the back of the Bendham figures. That's my theory.
Makes sense.
Oh, I like that position. Is he cowering, or is he got his fist up like he's ready to fight?
So this is I was supposed to have this done by April Fool's Day, but working with Splendid Editions, we're challenging each other to do some sculpting, and so the prompt was the Chalice of Malice, and so he's going to be holding a little chalice like so.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm way behind, but I figured this would be fun to do anyway. That guy, by the way, if anybody's not aware of Splendid Editions on Instagram, some amazing sculpts there. He does some crazy stuff with epoxy sculpt and interesting articulation and stuff too. He's sent some examples of that stuff, like the jigs he's built, and man, the guy's a smart dude. Let's see. I haven't seen any info on how to do the casting part of making a bendy toy. This info is very helpful. Thanks for sharing. There you go.
If you when you get around to it, ordinary, it would be great to see your process there. See how those how that mold sets up. I had an idea of doing it too. That's why I was looking into it then, and I thought that might be a cool way to do the fringe figures. I was even thinking of doing bendable action figures with removable and articulated parts, so it would only like bend in the arm and legs and such. But I was discouraged by the result of the rubber, and that was I didn't have another need to use the rubber, so ended up losing most of that bottle. But I probably should have experimented with samples from Smooth On first. Cut it into strips and put some wire through it and figure out which felt right.
You say that again? You're talking about removable articulation?
Yeah, like or rather a bendy action figure in which you can remove the head, the legs, the arms.
Ah,
Yeah.
Interesting. That's a good topic there, maybe, but I do think it's to me an interesting piece of this puzzle is just figuring out the toy part, or the action feature part of it, rather than just a static sculpture. That intrigues me, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't think, had I not discovered your videos and things and talking about armatures and how to build the articulation, I don't think I would be doing this, honestly, because it's just, that's what intrigues me about this whole thing, is making it actually function.
Yeah, and I've these Goth figures have no function. There's no action play to them, but I do find it appealing to as a practice tool, as a way to experiment with these things, with designs.
Yeah, well, and the bounty buddies too. I mean, like there's nothing wrong with not having articulation. I just I think it's that's what kind of got me excited about this thing, though, and
Sure. Yeah.
there's a place for all of it. I just saying that's where it was like, I didn't like, oh, you're just gonna sculpt some like little static figures. I wouldn't have been excited about that. But now that I've gotten into it, now I am a little more excited about. I'm sculpting a static figure right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the whole debate over like articulation or not. I think that does add a feature, maybe, or an excitement part, or a nostalgic part even. That's a piece of this for me.
I would argue that the collectors who say they like articulation but never take it out of the package,
Yeah.
their argument is
I guess I can understand some of
undercut.
that. Yeah, I mean, I can understand some of that because if you're doing this, you're buying a piece that's from somebody that, like us, it's going to be a handcrafted type of a thing, and sometimes you don't want to mess up somebody's work, or it's like, you appreciate what they've done, and like, yeah, I don't know, maybe there's a piece of that there I can understand, but it's also pretty cool.
Maybe I'll figure out a bad design package for the fringe figures so that people do open it and take it out.
Well, I think that's
done it for number 2.
A lot of those like header cards and the little baggies makes a lot of sense. Like let's see if this is a good example right here, actually. Yeah. So I've got a Barrio Boba piece. He does a header card and a little baggie, but he only staples the header card to one side of the baggie. So you can still open it up without, you're not messing anything up. You can take the guy out, put him back in. I think that's pretty smart packaging design, I have one of those resealable blister things too from Empire Blisters around here somewhere, but that's another way to do it, where you can open it up and close it back up.
Yeah.
I'm curious, seems to be the way I sculpt is like, it's very much additive and subtractive, where I'll just add a bunch of clay on or wax, and then I'll carve it back and then add more on and in the right places and carve it back. Is that similar for you?
Yeah, and especially with wax, I would say the tip is apply more wax than you need because you are going to carve it back. It's rare that I get the detail I want with just applying the wax.
Yeah. The little tips are real handy to give you kind of precise control, but it's still just a blob of wax, right?
Yeah.
At least in my experience, it comes out a little sloppy, and then you have to carve it back and get the details back in and work it back and forth a few times. I'm digging this texture. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I've never done it before, but
You said you're going to cast that in wax?
yeah, I'm thinking about it. Although it's so small, I might be able to just get all the detail in monster clay here and not have to mess with wax, but time will tell. Yeah, once again, not planning this out. I meant this to be like Keshi size, but it's quite a bit bigger than that. It's okay. The point of this whole thing was just to get sculpting and just do something.
You're here.
Yeah. I get in my head about stuff a lot, like trying to make things perfect and not share anything unless it's like done, and it's like I just need to bust myself out of that. Just do some stuff, have fun with it. So I'm wearing this goofy optimizer and I didn't even forgot it was there. Did you watch the last episode of The Mandalorian?
Yeah.
Hmm.
It was a pretty good payoff.
Yeah, we just finished it last night. The kids like it. I thought it was pretty good. I'm not gonna. There's been worse Star Wars material out there. But I also is not like I like Star Wars and I've always liked the original trilogy, but like I'm not the diehard Star Wars fan that a lot of guys are.
It feels like the more you're aware of the story, the more you have an opinion of how it should have been,
Yeah.
could have been. And in that way, I let my ignorance of Star Wars lore allow me to enjoy the recent productions more.
Yeah. There you go.
Which, if the company is trying to attract new fans,
Makes a lot of sense.
the whole season might have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
They love seeing their favorite celebrities in the show.
Right. That's that episode with Jack Black and what's her name? The other singer. That was pretty,
Lizzo.
Lizzo. That was pretty funny. I liked it.
Yeah, it was a different flavor for sure.
Yeah. But man, if I got the chance to be in a Star Wars episode, man, I'd jump on it. Don't blame them at all.
Well, if you think about like well-known actors who show up in Star Wars, Andy Serkis's performance
Oh man.
was like was a central element to that story. And
Talking in Andor.
yeah.
That was...
you know, Jack Black and Lizzo were the comedy for that episode, which was fun.
Sure. Yeah. It's hard to compare Jack Black to Andy Serkis. But man, Andor, I was a big fan of that show.
Oh, yeah.
That was well done, in my opinion.
Very well done.
But I also really liked Rogue One. I know there's people that weren't into that, but I thought that was well done as well.
Yeah, it was a good story to tell. I like that we're now getting the back story on Andor himself.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that whole thing was just kind of like, why would we care about Andor? You know, Cassian Andor was like this little side character they built in order to make that Rogue One work, and then they just sort of fleshed it out into something that was really interesting, I thought. Anyway, Star Wars. Most divisive franchise ever created.
Most divisive, but both sides still watch.
That's true. That's very true.
Oh, all right. I'm gonna wrap up here. Gotta run.
All right.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Definitely. Well, we appreciate everybody being in the chat too. With one more comment here. Ordinary. I was inspired to try it by the Flex Zor figures by Zola World. They're awesome toys, but they barely bend, and I'd love to make a bendy toy that size, but with more bending ability. Who was it? There was somebody on Instagram that actually successfully made the big boy toy. Remember, like big boys restaurants? That was flexible.
You had to look through the chats on that.
Yeah, I can't remember. Was that Colin?
I'm sure we
That has-
do
has
a
it?
story about it. Someone will reach out. Oh, maybe that sounds right. I'm kind of basing it based off the logo I remember seeing in the thread.
Yeah, but somebody did, and so it's worth looking and asking them. I don't know exactly how that worked, but anyway, yeah. But appreciate everybody being here and watching us work a little bit and talk about the process. I'm
gonna make that I'm gonna put that presentation as a PDF on my bio if anyone is interested in taking a look at that again.
Nice.
So
yeah,
all right,
and
guys.
we'll do this again.
Yep.
All right, cheers.
All right, see you, man.